This is the Dubai Future Forum 2023. We're about to open the Foresight Insights track with a sparkling debate. We are here at the base of the Museum of the Future, as this debate will take us back to the base of Foresight practice, back to basics. We will go through what makes a futurist. Our three guests are ready. 45 minutes is all we have. Let's start with the problem statement, and I will then introduce you to the guests today and give them the floor. We have 5 problems. Number 1, the number of people calling themselves futurists is incrementally increasing without an equivalent steep rising in the initiatives for foresight education and learning and development. We have more than 15,000 people having futurists in their LinkedIn description, whereas Association of Professional Futurists counts 634 members yesterday night, and the World Future Studies Federation counts 308, with a non-zero overlap between the two. Problem number 2, the discipline is highly fragmented. Jim Dator already back in 2008 was lamenting, and I quote, "The previous works in the field have not been cited, and futures and foresight scholars have thus been repeating derivative claims without taking into account that these have been raised elsewhere several times." So we're not building on each other's professional development. Also, you can see in another article by Munch and van der Gracht in 2021 that 0.31% of the papers in the practice are actually bringing forward the development of the field. Also, fragmentation in how we're networking as a field is evident if you use the platform Connected Papers or any of the paper that you like in the foresight field. Also, lastly, just look at the titles of UNESCO chairs, and I'm bringing myself into the mix. The fragmentation is evident because you have 37 different titles, and if that's the next to the top level that we have, well, we are more fragmented than the field of mathematics and just short of the field of physics, but having 1/100th of their paper production. Problem number 3, we're lagging behind with professionalization. Association of Professional Futurists Evaluation Task Force actually states that Association of Professional Futurists should lead the professionalization and credentialing. And also we have the Kramer's posit from her PhD thesis, where futurists actually do not want to professionalize. Problem number 4, we have an economic problem as a result of all the 3 before. There is no structured job market. Foresight positions are rarely built within a larger and comprehensive framework within organizations, and mostly performing trends analysis. And there is somewhat a cult of personalities in the field where established foresight professionals are attracting the interests of all the others. And problem number 5, as a result, we have very little influence in the public debate and public policy, to the point that if you just count how many futurists are advising government versus how many economists are advising governments, well, Johan Christensen, 2018, actually shows and speaks of economic knowledge as a source of authority in policy making, and quotes a figure of 800 people over the course of 45 years advising the government of Norway only. So, increasing number of people calling themselves futurists, problem number 1. The discipline is high fragmented, problem number 2. We're lagging behind with professionalization, number 3. Economic problem, no job market, problem number 4. Very little influence on public policy and intellectual debate, problem number 5. And so let me introduce you with this problem statement to our guests today. I have right here Alisha Bhagat. She's the future lead from the Forum for the Future, and previously she has worked in strategic foresight in Centra, supporting US intelligence community and security agency. We have Sarah DaVanzo. She is the Pierre Fabre Consumer Experience Officer, including Foresight, and previously she was the VP of Insights and Foresight in L'Oreal, In 1998, she led the South African Goals Future Strategy post-apartheid. And lastly, but last and the best, we have Alex Fergnani. He is an associate professor of strategy at Rabat Business School, a FETSIL scholar, an Academy of Management, an honorary researcher fellow at Strathclyde Business School, and lastly, an avid YouTuber.
Thank you.
Alisha, I'd like to start with you.
Okay.
Is professionalization actually a problem?
I think it's complicated. I think saying is professionalization a problem is asking, kind of to your point of, is there too much of a supply of futurists, or do we have not enough? And I would say both. There's too many people claiming to be futurists, but then perhaps not as many people who are actually trained as futurists as what is needed by the market. So I think that professionalization is a problem. I do find that a lot of students come to me wanting to know what courses to take, where to go, and certainly when I was starting out my career, and I am not officially certified, nor did I go to any Foresight school. I am a learn by experience person, so I was lucky enough to go through a system in which I had amazing mentors that took a chance on me and were able to teach me about Foresight and how to apply it. So I do think that kind of the informal networks is maybe not the best for serving the number of people who do want to be futurists and use futures.
Sarah, what do you see from your observatory at the board level?
So at a corporate level, I think professionalization is an important topic, just like a therapist. You want to make sure of the type of therapist that you're going to go to and what kind of skill sets they might have so that you can choose the therapist that you want. Maybe you want a psychiatrist, maybe you want a psychologist, maybe you want a couples counselor. And so in order to understand what you're working with and the methodologies that we'll talk about, it's important for us to have some kind of apples to apples comparison. However, I'm very much in favor of anything that brings down the barriers to this industry. So diversity is probably, for me, the biggest issue that we have in the society, in our profession, more so than professionalization. Because we want diverse voices. We want to bring people into our field, and I'm very afraid that putting up certain barriers will be even more elitist and exclusionary than us sitting here. We're all very privileged in this audience, and I think what we want to make sure is that we're hearing voices and being very inclusive in our Foresight work. So it is a double-edged sword. I see the value of it, but I also think it might help some, and I'm not sure if it's actually professionalization. Maybe it's KPIs. This is something that's tied to it, is actually, should we be actually identifying what the KPIs are of our industry as opposed to trying to figure out what the professionalization is.
Sarah, let me take this to Alex. So Alex, from your observatory, we're having here a conversation about is professionalization a problem, together with how to make this inclusion and diversity aware, and as well, how do we make sure to have enough learning and development initiatives?
Thanks for asking, Gabriele. Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge the privilege that it is for me to be here. I'm extremely honored to be in this distinguished panel, and I see many of the most distinguished Foresight experts in the field just in the audience in front of me, so it's amazing to be here. Now, coming to the matter at hand, I think diversity is extremely important, and we need to acknowledge the diversity. So I want to second both Alisha and Sarah on diversity. This field is perhaps one of the most diverse, and we should honor this diversity. But on the other hand, I would not only agree, but perhaps even stress even more the problem statement that Gabriele has provided us, because I think the issue is really problematic, because I'm going to stress more what he said. We don't have a job market. If we don't have a job market, it means that if you're young and you want to be a Foresight professional or a futurist, however you call it, and you want to make a living out of it, because at the end of the day, if you don't make a living out of it, you're not going to sit in that chair. Well, it's going to take you 30 years to do that, and that's really bad, right? And if you have a graduate degree in Foresight or in future studies, and you want to be a professor of Foresight, and you want to be a lecturer of Foresight, Well, good luck with that, because I can tell you, no departments on earth have good funding in this field. That you have to, you have to bow and kowtow to other departments. You're not going to be able to do your foresight, and you're going to do it stealthily in your classes because the department chair doesn't like you to do it. So this is really a problem, and we need to start acknowledging it first of all. And the fact that we are diverse and holistic, great. This is one of the most holistic professions on earth, but let's be aware that we don't want to be jokes of all trades, right? Let's be aware that the risk of resisting rigor, resistant science, resisting mainstream features of the capitalist labor market that we have to live in, it's making us one of the most underdog professions on earth. So this is really a problem. I just want to stress that. And let's acknowledge diversity. Let's find a way to do that while making sure we are clear on what a foresight, professional, futurist, however you want to call it, and the skill set thereof is. Okay.
Sarah, oh, you want to go?
Can I build on something you said? I think it's important language. Language is everything. Futurist, receptionist, botanist, I can go on. I wonder whether or not that language is now, we need to involve it. Maybe we're foresight strategists. I mean, I don't want to get corny, but I think there might be an opportunity here that we think about what are we doing in the world of foresight and futurism? Are we a futures activist? Are we a strategist? And in medicine, let's use that as a metaphor, you have an oncologist, you have a brain surgeon, you have general practitioners. And sometimes there's a role for a general practitioner futurist, potentially. And maybe we need to have somebody who specializes in AI foresight. So I would love to bring that conversation in, is that maybe language needs some involvement too in this field.
Just to build off that, I 100% agree, and I think that it's no longer enough to say that you're a futurist. You kind of have to clarify it and boil down into why are you here? Why are you even engaging with the futures at all? Is it to do design? Is it to create art? Is it to create social change? Are you an activist? Are you interested in making more money? So finding your kind of core theory of change or your core mission, I think then sort of defines the flavor of futurist you are. And I currently don't even necessarily see that happening, let alone getting into professionalization. It's almost like professionalization of which of those strands.
You would have to have multiple different certifications.
So I'm hearing that maybe we have the need for several different professional figures rather than just the futurist. Alex?
Yes, and I do believe that we need to start talking about these several different professions. Maybe they're different professions. Have we just noticed that the Foresight tracks, the Foresight Insight track here at the forum, are people who know each other pretty much because they have been in the field for a long time. And then there is a lot of other people who come from a lot of different professions that do not necessarily know each other, who are doing amazing stuff about the future, right? The future of X, Y, Z, but they don't know the Foresight Insight track. So that's an interesting thing I've noticed just in the past 24 hours, right? So maybe there is a distinction that we need to sharply define that, right? Between maybe a foresight professional and futurist in general, who does futurism in general. And maybe we want to talk about what set of skill sets and credentials both defines, right? Defines both, sorry.
Exactly. So let's have this conversation. I mean, if we need several different professional figures, what are the differences in the skill set that they have, and what skill set makes each of them? What skill set makes a futurist, for instance? Anyone?
Yeah. So, funny you should ask. I just did some research. And so the main conclusion of the research with 157 futurists from around the world was curiosity is the number one, if you will, characteristic. So we're all curious beasts, right? But I know from my practical management of enterprise, I work at Fortune 500 companies managing foresight or advising them for the past 15 years. So there's two types of talent that I've found, and we were talking about this the other day, is that there are data analysts and those folks that are able to parse the data. And increasingly more so with data overload and with AI, which I'll talk about later today. But then there's a strategic imagination. And those are, there tend to be, sometimes there are unicorns that do both, right? That are extremely creative and imaginative, and sometimes that they can do also the data analysts. But I tend to find that the teams are separate because the tools they're working with and the methodologies that they're using are different. So in my mind, the teams tend to have two kind of, and I don't want to say this left brain, right brain, but in a very basic sensibility. One's futurism, imagination, scenarios, plausibility, and then there's the analytics or forecasting, and then that tends to be very data heavy or algorithmic in some ways.
So let's park this for a second because I'm hearing several different words here. I want to just focus on the imagination piece. Alisha, are imagination and curiosity skills or other talents?
Ooh, that is a tough one. I think that it is definitely something that is a talent, but a talent that could be cultivated. So it is a talent that is within every person to be curious, to be imaginative. I don't think that in every education system around the world, or based on who you are and your socioeconomic class and other kind of factors, that everybody has the privilege to sit and imagine, the capacity to imagine, the ability to take risks. So I think that in so much that educational spaces can provide that for people, that's very valuable, so that, you know, somebody could go through a Foresight program and try to cultivate that innate kind of imagination. And I would also build I'll add one more skill to your list. And I think that is, I don't know whether to call it user experience or communications, right, or facilitation, but there's also another whole set of futuring skills where ultimately, at least in my practice, a huge portion is reaching people, helping people understand change, helping people see the need to act. And they are not going to get that through reading a report, even if it is the best report. It's how that report is communicated, how we might talk to them about it, you know, tools that we might design like games or scenario immersion exercises. So that skill set of facilitating, understanding people and what they need is kind of another whole skill set, and some futurists specialize in just that.
So Alisha, let me just hit the nail on the head once again here. So if imagination and curiosity are talents that can be cultivated, okay, we have a skill set of facilitation that's something that we can teach and people can learn. But aside from that, if we're providing Foresight education, learning, development, training, what skills are imparting on people? What skills are cultivating?
I mean, I would say like the academic research, the methods, those are all part of it as well. I'll caveat by saying that a lot of the methods, I feel, people think that they are one size fits all, and it's not the case. A lot of these methods were kind of created for companies, and then people try to use them on a community level, and they don't always make sense. So I do think that there's space for more methods to be created and for people to experiment. So I think that there's sort of the academic body of work, there's the methods, but ultimately a futurist is a little bit like a chef. Like, you have these ingredients, but then what you do with it is up to the individual, and you can go to the best culinary school and nobody wants to eat your food, or you could go to the best culinary school and everybody wants to eat your food, you know? So I think there's a range for different practice even after people are accredited, which is where the kind of softness comes in.
Well, let me take this to Alex. Alex, so if keeping the chef metaphor here, how do we get to Michelin stars?
That's a great question. So much to say, so little time. So I'm going to try and say something provocative as I like to do. So I apologize in advance if I offend anybody. I think there are a lot of people who do great work who call themselves futurists, and a lot of people who do not necessarily do great work who call themselves futurists. So I take the perspective of the first kind, and that is very foresight oriented, right? So it's steeped into the literature, the history, the legacy, the methodological development, case studies of the larger field of future studies and strategic foresight, which by today almost has 8+ decades of that legacy in history, right? So if we take that as a starting point to define the features that make us master chef, as you say, I like the metaphor. Well, again, I don't have enough time, but I'll try to provide a couple of pointers. First of all, I think we need to go beyond trends. We should not get stuck and fixated on current trends, current events, and current public figures. So many so-called futurists profess one single future based on the continuation of current trends, current events, and the continuation of current public figures. That's not the futures, that's the present. It's an exploration of the present, right? And to make matters worse, sometimes these projections are colored by emotions, right? Oh my God, we're in a pandemic. We're gonna be virtual for the next 40 years, right? That's fear, that's not foresight. So to the uttermost extent, I think we should develop and encourage the use of scenarios that take into account discontinuities, wildcards, weak signals, that dislodge our attention to the present and make it very clear that we use scenarios and extract insights from scenarios to take better decisions in the present. This is the point of Amy Webb's keynote last year. I'm just making it a bit more assertive. So absolutely make it clear that this profession is about scenarios and using scenarios, normatively, exploratively, how you wish. Not only trends. Trends are important, right? We need to provide that trend report, but it's not only trends. Secondly, methods. Alisha, Sarah, I second you 100%. Methods are crucial. And, I would add, not but and, methodology, right? So not only methods, which you can throw on the table, and that's the toolkit, it's very pretty, but methodology is knowledge and I dare say wisdom on how and when to use each method. And as you said, the fact that you create new methods out of the context requirements, that's also methodology, right? And I second you also on facilitation skills. Because guys, at the end of the day, most of the stuff we do is facilitating groups of individuals, right? So we need to start talking about this very solid set of skill sets that we need to have, which is facilitating people. And that's not easy, right? It's about managing emotions. There's gonna be emotions, right? Because we're talking about the futures. So there are deeply held views about the future which we might or might not want to dislodge. How do we do that? Facilitation skills, communication skills, right? How do we have scenario planning participants generate scenarios without feeling that we impose on them? Facilitation skills, communication skills. How do we engage the client? How do we communicate with the client? Institutionalize foresight in the organization. Facilitation, communication skills, client engagement skills. And by the way, above all, I've spent years in Asia, so I take a lot of references from that part of the world. From the art of war, let's not fight the battles that we cannot win. If there is an organization that you know it's not gonna get any out of the foresight project, right, that is going to recrudesce into its own mistakes and not learn anything, just don't do anything with that organization. That's also a skill. So I could go on. I'm going to stop there.
Let me take this, and expand this a little bit more from my personal experience. A couple of things. One is I was always amazed at how deep and how fast you can go when you start using imagination, right? So absolutely, I hear the point of facilitation. You need to know where you're going when you're facilitating groups, because otherwise you basically have a license to kill. And that's not what you want from your group. And one other thing that will be a segue to our next question. So recently I was with a large pharmaceutical company having a conversation about having a foresight practice. They're a B2B company, so nothing to the consumer. And the CEO told me, all right, so I get this point, but basically I am buying the person. I'm like, what do you mean? I mean, there's no way to know whether you're like a god in foresight or you're a junior. And I'm like, well, you have my CV. And they said, well, yes, but once again, it's one singular experience. So this takes me to asking you, do we need credentialing to assert and certify to what extent and level and in what form, shape, or way we have mastery of the skills that make the skill set as master chefs? Alisha.
I mean, I think you need credentialing, but I think it will always come down to personality on top of credentialing. Just because it is so personal. What industries they have experience in, what communities they're a part of and have worked with before. That's very deeply personal. And it's not to say that people can't do a wealth of different things. But I think it's kind of like being a therapist or a designer, to go with those metaphors, is that you have the credentials, but then the designer you pick, it often comes down to their portfolio. Or who they're, you look at kind of examples of their work and then you think like, oh, that's something I'd be interested in. So I do think that will continue to be a part of it, because not all of us are going to be the same, even if we were all having the same credentials. So that credential is almost like just a baseline that then the portfolio is built off of for people to look at. And I also think that right now we sort of live in a credential-less situation. Like the world right now is without credential, as you stated. So all of us are very portfolio driven in terms of the industries in which we work and the expertise that we have and the methods and methodologies that we work with. And I think that while it is good to establish a baseline, it is kind of a radical shift from the way that this has been conducted so far. Whereas you mentioned everybody knows everybody, and while I agree with you, it's diverse, I think that it's not diverse enough. It's not as diverse as it could be. So we would have to make sure that the credentialing took into account people out there who are like thinking to themselves, like, I want to be a futurist, but I don't see myself represented in the group of futurists yet. So how do we bring them in through the credentialing process?
Well, thank you for that. I want to ask you also, like, I want to just prompt you to be a debater to yourself.
Yeah.
So what is the value in non-credentialing?
The value in non-credentialing?
So, keeping, as Sarah was saying at the very beginning, we need to keep the bar as low as we can because we want to be inclusive. So the lowest bar is no bar.
Nothing.
Is there value in having that?
Well, okay, artists. I'm just saying,
Hold on, sir.
What?
Before I want to listen to your answer, but I want to hear from Alisha first.
I don't think that, I do think that there's a value in having a low bar in that it reduces barrier to entry, and there's probably people out there who are successfully doing futures with their community in a way that a professional futurist coming in would not do a better job than what they're already doing. They're already telling stories or talking to people, and I think that going and telling them like, you're not doing real futures is maybe not helpful. But I think that in the sort of big futuring that we're talking about here, in terms of large organizations, governments, policy change, I do think it's useful. So I just want to say, like, I think we can hold both in terms of nurturing grassroots, community-driven access to futures, but also keeping the professional futurists to a higher standard.
Well, anticipation is an innate capacity, right? So, Sarah, what's your point in this?
Building on Alicia's point of view, I'm violent agreement. But I get back to the KPIs. So I'm going to use an example from my work at L'Oreal Group, and I was running the team, and we had to create a spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet was specifically from the insights, from the market research, from all of the methods that we used, and each of the, if you will, trends or visions or scenarios, and we had to track it throughout the organization. How many times was it mentioned by the CEO? How many times was it mentioned at a board meeting? What innovations in the innovation pipeline were affected? And then track that through to what went into market, how many millions of dollars were made from that foresight, okay? So it took years to do this, but we had to do it to prove the value. I mean, every year was constantly justifying the budget and justifying growing the team and growing the tools. So it would be very helpful if the industry rallied to come up with a method or methodology or a format in order to help people track their work, the KPIs that give people a way to justify themselves to either their prospective employers or current employers or just to themselves. And I think the fact that we had to make this ourselves just so we could track our KPIs is kind of ridiculous. And we have a lot of resources. So I think I'm going to switch the conversation to say I would love to see us rally around that as opposed to credentialing right now, because that's very basic. That will help everybody immediately to be able to give them some kind of framework for measuring their impact on the work.
Let me ask something here. Steconditor's law says that any meaningful idea about the future should seem to be ridiculous at first. Alex, how can we keep KPIs on something that should be ridiculous to a board?
I wanted to address the issue about credential. I can address this first.
Do both.
Oh, well, that's going to be tough. So the question is about, do KPIs on?
Yeah, the part on, I think that's basically the same point, because if we're doing a good job as a futurist, means exploring something that should seem to be ridiculous to people in the present. Right?
Fair, absolutely. So do you want me to talk about credentials first, or about this first?
Good. You always have the same amount of time.
Okay, so I'll talk about credentials first. When you hear credentials, what you probably think, I'm talking to you and to myself and to the audience, you're probably thinking about a degree, right? I see some people nodding. So I just want to be clear that we shouldn't be as blasé and as old school to say you need to get a degree in Foresight. So that, as an assumption, should be clear, right? Now, that being said, I think we need to make credentials explicit. I repeat, make credentials explicit. Now they're implicit, and being implicit, they're often confused. So this does not go against your very important point to acknowledge that new people want to come in and we don't want to shut the door in front of them, right? But it can go along the fact that we want to be very explicit about credentials. And when we want to be very explicit is about what are the skill sets that if you get into this door, which is open for you, you are going to have to develop, right? You can get into the door, but I want you to develop these certain skill sets, right? Which we can talk about. So that's, I think, it's the important part on credentials. And that's my reaction to that part. Now, to the part on KPI, I think there's one very, very important way to start measuring what we do. That is the impact of what we do. That is not seldom discussed, which is you can actually do experiments on the outcomes of futures and foresight interventions, because as we said, it's facilitating individuals. And most of the evaluation that we do currently are longitudinal cross-sectional studies that take years to know the outcome of it, right? And it's good that we have those longitudinal cross-sectional studies that assess the outcome of foresight on a number of key impact factors. And it's going to come back to us in 2029. Fair, good. But before 2029, we need something quicker because we need to prove that foresight is impactful to organizations. And to do that, we can do experiments. We can measure the impact on our mind, right? With the psychometric measures. We can measure the impact on scenario planning, on creativity, on change of mindset. Well, performance, depending what performance.
It could be. There's studies that show.
Okay, that is longitudinal. Yeah. So that will take a long time. But psychometric measures on our mind, you can have it tomorrow, right? So that is my way to do it. And by the way, just to stress, we can continue doing the longitudinal stuff, but we can also do the experimental stuff. Yeah.
Well, let me ask to the whole panel, to the whole debaters here, another question. So I presented at the very beginning the fact that in 2021, Merck and van der Graaf showed that just a fraction of a percentage point in the papers in the field are bringing forward the methodological grounds of the foundations, right? Is moving the foundations forward a duty of a futurist? Sarah.
So I wonder, I think about this a lot. Should we not have accelerators? What's the future of foresight? What's the future of futures? And so where do you go to learn about what's being developed today at the grassroots level? Because I'm not seeing a platform where the methodology, other than KBFS, right? The KBFS, I'm not seeing the methods being shared in a way that's open and collaborative, and I would like that. I'm inviting a place where we could co-create, invent, experiment, do trial and error with methods, and kind of come up with methodology. I'm with you on that. Like, is it design thinking? Is it a futures thinking process? And at the very least, the certification or whatever that is you know how to run. I get certified in design thinking. Why not for futures thinking, right? So But where's the place? And maybe it's the museum here. Maybe it's this institution because there's a physical place and there's labs and there's people. But I think it's a big point is that we need to facilitate this and share. Very importantly, share what we're learning.
So if I'm hearing you right, you're saying that after certification, then you do have the duty to push the foundations forward, right?
I think so. Usually you would learn to paint as a master before you became a Jackson Pollock or a Picasso a cubist. Okay, so
right.
Typically you have a skill.
Alisha, do you think that those futurists that you said in your regard should be held to a higher standard have this duty?
I don't think that it's in everybody's skill set. I think some people could be certified and just execute methodology really well and thoughtfully, and not everybody is cut out to create methodology, and those people are still making contribution to the field. I think some people are very academic and are good at methodology, and they should do that, and we can learn from them. And I would second your point that there aren't a lot of spaces to collaborate. This is one of them, but certainly the way that we measure impact is by simply looking at impact. I was just asking the companies, did the strategy we do for you, was that effective? Did your organization feel like they changed their mindset once they went through this futures exercise? So kind of getting that direct feedback loop does help us know, it's effective, it's not, it's resonating with the people that it's supposed to resonate with.
Alex, are those two different types of figures? The futurist who is executing methodologies and the futurist who is producing new methodologies?
Yeah, they do what?
And where's their place?
So know more about we were talking about how is the field evolving. Is this connected? So we want to know what, can you rephrase the question, sorry?
Are there two different places for these two types of futurists?
Well, yes. So I will take the position of the foresight professional, foresight expert. Foresight XYZ, put whatever thing you need at the end. Foresight advocate, foresight journalist, foresight expert. So yes, that is what we do. We should measure the outcomes. But I still don't understand the question. I'm sorry.
No, I'm saying so in your opinion, if I'm hearing you right, we have a futurist who is implementing methodologies and preparing workshops, and then you have a foresight professional or scholar or expert or executive who is producing new methodologies and implementing those.
Okay, so you want to know what is the distinction for me, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, for me, the person who facilitates the workshop and runs the intervention, the foresight intervention, and possibly even have some overseeing on measuring the outcome of it, is what I call foresight professional. What I see as a futurist is somebody who does futurism, which is not necessarily foresight, right? It's a range of forward-looking approaches and speculations about the future, which we see in this very forum, which may or may not be rigorous and may or may not be based on foresight practice steeped in literature and case studies and methodology. That's fine. It may be for entertainment. It may be for implications for society at large. But I see two different things. So what I can talk about is the first kind, the foresight professional. I cannot talk about the futurist, because I don't think we should even use the name futurist anymore for these reasons. I'm not a futurist.
So my last question to all of you. We explored a range of problems and a range of proposed solutions or idea or stances or postures that we have with regards to them. Do you think, in your opinion, is all that we mentioned enough for us in the field to regain traction in the public policy debate and in the intellectual field? Sarah, Alisha?
I don't, because I'm still harping on the KPIs. I'm still harping on that. If you don't show the impact, we don't have a universal way of showing the impact.
Provided that we're able to prove KPIs.
Okay.
If all of the above is true, right? So if all and everything we discussed, we're able to implement that.
Yeah.
Is that enough for the professionals here at this level to regain traction in public policy debate and intellectual field?
Well, I'm going to answer just because you're looking at me.
Last minute for everyone.
Okay, yeah, but last minute is I do think as a profession, to your point, we have more than 12 learning styles, how people learn in different ways. The way in we communicate and bring the future forward and help to communicate through all the different learning styles is very important, and I don't even have the skill set to do all of this, and I really wish that we as a profession, beyond just speculative fiction and performance and sci-fi, and like you could go through the kind of the design fiction, speculative performance area and art, I think that there's other ways to communicate, and how might we communicate kinetically or orally and things like that. I think that's an important element as we're struggling to break through and be understood and to teach. And so those methods, I think, could be imparted in our profession.
Alisha, what's your take on it?
It's not enough, because I think that there is still not a clear understanding amongst the public why futures is necessary in the first place. So in people and in organizations, a lot of big organizations don't care about futures, to be frank, or they don't know that it is a thing. So I think if we say that we're going to solve our problems by professionalizing, there's still a lot of work to do to make the case for futures, to show that using a futures process will lead you to a different outcome than if you don't, to make futures inclusive and participatory so people feel like their community is being reached, and all the things that is needed to kind of, we can work on the supply, but the demand factors for the profession as well.
All right, so I want to be mindful of your time. Thanks for staying here for the 3 minutes overtime. Thanks, everybody. Join me in a round of applause to our guests here. Thank you, and enjoy the conference.